Welcome to something that could be good, but probably ain't, honestly. I say this because remember how I did a whole video about Gran Turismo Sport sales, and I gave a situation in which if GT Sport sales are low, it could be a good thing for the Gran Turismo franchise in the long run, because maybe that would give PD the realization that going in the way of sport games is not going to be as financially successful in the long run as going in the way of number games. Well, that situation has happened about halfway, meaning the sales are low. 3.3 million copies. GT6 sold about 5.2 million copies. That's the lowest one of the main ones so far. This is at 3.3. And anyway, I say it's only done that halfway because, well, at this point, Gran Turismo 7 is not planned. PD has not acknowledged that game to even exist. They haven't said it's going to happen. They haven't said they're working on it. There's been rumors that GT7 might happen, but there's been nothing to prove those rumors as true. So as of now, officially, these are the numbers, and officially, Gran Turismo 7 is not going to happen. That's about the worst combination possible. GT Sport compared to all the other Gran Turismo main games is failing. And Gran Turismo 7 is not happening to save the franchise. And honestly, that's only getting into it. Here's the juicy bit, if that wasn't juicy enough. Let's get into the actual details, folks. I'm not going to read this out completely, but y'all can. And to sum it up, there's a Gran Turismo World Tour going on right now. Pretty much if you're in North America, you have to tour half the world to even get to it. I'm going to be positive and say that's why it's called that. Even though it's only at the Nürburgring and you have to be at the track to do it. Maybe that means if you're on other continents, you have to tour over there to do it. I don't know. But nonetheless, that's going on, and they announced at that the total sales for the Gran Turismo franchise is 80.4 million copies sold. That's good. And the previous total was 77.02 million copies sold. That's slightly less. The exact amount slightly less is 3.38 million copies. Meaning, PD did not actually say the exact numbers of the individual Gran Turismo games. I'll get into more of that later. But they did say the total, and doing math compared to what the total used to be, it can be calculated that Gran Turismo Sports total is 3.38 million. Here is the totals of every other Gran Turismo game. The main games being 1 through 6, not with the additional titles and not with like anything that ain't a number. Meaning Gran Turismo, over 10 million. That's pretty cotton picking good right yonder. GT2, about 9 million, slightly less, but that was on the PS1's way out, so understandable. GT3, best-selling Gran Turismo ever. The first one that came out pretty cotton picking early on the PS2's life cycle. And the PS2 was the high-selling console of all time, so it makes sense for that to be the high-selling Gran Turismo of all time. Concept wasn't a main game. GT4 Prologue was a main game. They didn't sell terrible, though, for games that weren't really full games. GT4 considered to be the best Gran Turismo on average. Pretty divided in what's considered the overall best, but I think the majority, even though it probably ain't even 50%, but I'd still say the majority of people say that GT4 is the best, so it sold about 12 million copies. Prologue and PSP weren't really main copies. Actually, for a PSP game, that might be one of the highest selling ever. PSP was mildly successful, not nearly as much as PS2, PS3. Anyway, to the PS3, GT5, first game on the PS3, it was bundled a whole heck of a heap. And it was the first HD generation, so that's a good combination for about 12 million copies. That's pretty good. GT6 had nothing going for it whatsoever. And remember how I explained a little bit for each of the previous games happening? Well, GT6 quite literally had nothing. In fact, it had negatives. PS4, already out when GT6 released. Grand Theft Auto 5 on the PS3. The highest-selling PS3 game, I'm pretty sure, of all time. Came out when the PS4 was already released. And even before GT6. So yeah, GT6 had nothing going for it. In fact, it had stuff going against it. So yeah, I think you can accept one failure with that. There's really no way it was going to succeed. GT Sport, apparently 3.38 million. What's the excuse there? I don't know. And that ain't even the half of it. Here we go, folks. I mentioned all of the other games here for a reason. Just saying that right now. With GT Sport launching last October, and then the review, it's fair to say it contributes about 3.38 million to sales. How much exactly, though, is unknown. Great. You see, PD updated its website to reflect the May 2018 numbers. Seemed accurate enough. It's May? Okay, that sounds good. But the previous totals, as shown above, have disappeared. Now doesn't that sound iffy? PD updated its website this month, the month of the Gran Turismo World Tour, where they announced the official sales of the franchise. The total franchise sales. They updated its website that same month to not show any individual game sales, including GT Sport. Moving on. It already seems a bit messed up. And then, to complicate matters, oh boy. Just gonna get right into it. PD has also specified that the new total is sold through. The previous listings were understood to be shipped to retailers, meaning they're not even considering the digital copies, which could mean a whole heck of a heap of things. Anyway, this means GT Sports numbers could actually, this is the whole heck of a heap of things, be higher than 3.3 million. Yay! Depending on how many unsold copies of older GT games are out there. And there's also the online sales. The online sales make sense. The unsold copies of other games, that's raising a pretty big red flag. PD has officially made every other game sells, and really even GT Sport, though you can do the math to figure it sells. So basically, PD themselves has taken all the sales of all the Gran Turismo games off their website, and the only thing they have is their total for all of the franchise. But yet this says this isn't factoring in unsold copies of older games. But there were no Gran Turismo games that ever got reprinted that I can think of. The only game that I can think of whatsoever that got reprinted is Skate 3. It came out in 2010, I think. And it had copies reprinted in 2014. That never happened with Gran Turismo. So therefore, there shouldn't really be unsold copies out there. But you know what that doesn't actually really say? Older GT games that are out there. It doesn't mention GT Sport. At all. So this leads me to believe that there's a whole heck of a heap of Gran Turismo Sport unsold copies out there. And maybe, just maybe, those 3.38 that you can calculate by the total sales of the series, it's a little bit skewed. Because bumping that number a little bit up is pretty unnoticeable compared to that 80 million mark. But you know what? Let's say there's 1 million unsold copies of GT Sport out there. And they just put that to the 80 million because it wouldn't really be all that noticeable. That's fair enough. 1 to 80 million, and it's not going to raise that big of a deal. But then yet this says it doesn't calculate into older GT games. Well, older GT games, yeah, that makes sense. There's not going to be any of them in there. But there could very well be a whole heck of a heap of unsold Gran Turismo Sport copies that PD's just putting into that total because they can, because they took off every other game sales. Doesn't that sound a little bit messed up now? Now, granted, there is this. This is a fair assumption. There's also the issue of online sales that's becoming increasingly important over the years, every year, whatever. That's true. That's a very truism right yonder. But it's still a fact. Even now, I don't really know why. I like the digital copies nowadays. It killed my previous PS4 getting a physical copy. But nonetheless, even now, digital copies do not sell as much as physical copies. And taking all of the copies off their main website, plus this, makes me think there's more unsold physical copies of Gran Turismo Sport than there are sold digital copies. So they don't want to release the quote-unquote digital copy sales because they're already lying about one number. So I bet that number would go down if they release anything more, because then there's just more official stuff out there that people could analyze and find stuff out about. Some negative stuff that I've already mentioned before. I mean, again, this is just a conspiracy, but it's a fact that PD has changed their website to not show numbers of any other Gran Turismo game, and the only way we know GT Sports numbers is by math. The only official thing on their website is the total sales of the franchise. Doesn't that seem a little bit messed up? I'm not a game developer, I'm not in sales, but yet I can still figure that out. This is not looking good. I mean, I'll read the end of this, but it's probably not saying that much more. GT Sport has been out for 7 months. It will be interesting to see whether blah blah blah. I think there's really nothing there. Basically saying if it outsells GT6 or if it can even outsell GT PSP. Jiminy Cricket, I would hope so. I mean, holy snikey, GT PSP was... I mean, it was a really good game, but the PS4 is way more popular than PSP. There's no denying that. If it can't outsell that, it has a problem. And the biggest problem is that it is looking like PD is lying about the sales. There's a whole heck of a heap of difference in copies made, like in circulation or whatever, and sold to people that physically have it. And I even say physically because the digital hasn't been announced at all. This may be nothing. I may be interpreting it wrong. But still, it's a very shady move on PD's part to take the sales off their website of every other game. The ones that are pretty much solid in terms of total sales. Those numbers are barely going to change anymore for every other game. GT6 in the last year or so. Last article put on GT Planet, I think had Gran Turismo 6 at like 5.06 million copies sold. That was made in like 2016, and apparently at 2018 it's at 5.2. And that's the newest one up to Gran Turismo Sport. It's gained a whopping about 100,000-ish in sales. Or 200,000-ish in sales. But still, compared to 5+ million, that's not very much. GT Sport's going to be the only one which has a noticeable number of sales happening. Or not happening. Again, this sounds more like a conspiracy than a fact, but PD is playing into that conspiracy big time. Is PD really need to be doing this as they release the new official sales of the franchise? Those two things happening at once, that just doesn't bode well. Gran Turismo Sport is sold less than any other main Gran Turismo game. That's a fact. What isn't a fact is the exact number, and I just have a hunch that it's actually lower than what's technically official. And that's scary for how low it already is. And even scarier, GT7 is still not announced. PD seems to be lying about totals and is unsure about the future. As of now, I'm not getting a PS5. As of now, I'm not getting Gran Turismo Sport 2. If GT7 happens, I'll reconsider. But as of now, PD's messing up pretty big. And there's really about only one thing that could save it at this point, and that's GT7. We'll see if that happens, folks, but as of now, it's looking bleaker than it has in a while, honestly, for Gran Turismo. Do you really need to lie about sales of a company that's obviously successful? Yeah, it's not doing as good now, but for Jiminy Cricket's sakes, this is making me lose all trust in PD. I didn't have that much to begin with after GT Sport came out, and their craziness with that penalty system. That's just one game. This is all games. All games don't have their sales numbers on the site anymore. That ain't worth yeehaw, is it? That's screwing up 20 years of numbers just to try to make one game look better. Yeah, this ain't gonna be good, folks. I really don't think.